April 9, 1241, on a flat plain outside the Silesian town of Legnica, two fundamentally incompatible visions of warfare were about to collide. On one side, the flower of European knighthood, Polish princes, German Teutonic knights, Templar crusaders, men armored in iron, riding war horses, ready for the shock of a direct charge, men who believed the battle was already as good as won. On the other side, the western two men of the Mongol Empire, commanded by Baidar, grandson of Genghis Khan. Fewer men, lighter horses, and a plan so psychologically sophisticated, the Europeans wouldn't understand what had happened to them until it was already over. The feigned retreat, it sounds simple, but executing it in the chaos of a real battlefield, while thousands of iron-clad knights are screaming toward you at full gallop, requires a discipline that borders on the inhuman. The Mongols had practiced this maneuver since childhood. It was not a trick, it was a doctrine encoded in their military training from the age of 5. When Mongol boys first learned to fire arrows backward over their horses at a full gallop, the Europeans had no framework for understanding what they were seeing. In their world, retreat meant defeat. It meant cowardice. It meant the battle was already won. And that misreading, that certainty,
Aye. Let the wind take it.
would be the death of them. Here is what European armor could and could not do in 1241. A full chainmail hauberk, 16 kilograms of interlinked iron ring, was exceptional protection against slashing, sword, cuts and spear thrusts at close quarters, but the Mongol war arrow fired from a 160-pound composite bow at 60 meters, arrived with enough kinetic energy to drive through the gaps in chainmail at the neck, armpit, and visor. The Mongols had spent generations studying exactly this. Their arrowheads were forged in 3 different profiles for 3 different armors, broad heads for chainmail gaps, needle points for lamella, and bodkin points for padded gambeson. And they had another secret that no European chronicler fully understood until centuries later. Beneath their leather lamella, every Mongol warrior wore a silk undershirt because a silk fiber, unlike linen or wool, wraps around an arrowhead on impact rather than tearing. Pull the silk through the wound and the arrowhead comes with it. Wounds that would have been fatal in a European army were survivable in a Mongol one. This was not magic, this was material science 7 centuries earlier. The chivalric code was not just a set of values, it was a tactical doctrine. It demanded that battles be decided by direct confrontation between armored equals. It demanded honor in engagement. You faced your enemy. You struck him with your own hand. You gave him the chances to yield. The very concept of a knight firing an arrow from a distance, from a horse, while running away, this was not merely tactically alien. To a 13th century European warrior, it was morally incomprehensible. And that incomprehension was a weapon, because a man who cannot emotionally process what is happening to him cannot respond effectively to it. The Polish and German knights at Legnica were not beaten because they lacked courage. They were beaten because their entire conceptual framework, centuries of training, culture, and belief, had no category for what Baidar was doing to them. By late morning on April 9th, 1241, it was over. The Polish-German coalition had not been defeated. It had been dismantled systemically, methodically, and almost surgically by an opponent that had never intended to fight the battle the Europeans expected. The Mongols reported fewer than 500 casualties. The coalition lost somewhere between 2,000 and 6,000 men, including most of the knightly leadership of Silesia and a substantial portion of the Teutonic Knights' Polish garrison. But the most important casualty at Legnica was not counted in bodies. It was the unexamined assumption held for 600 years across the continent. That armored cavalry, disciplined and courageous, decided battles. That assumption died in the Silesian dust, and the European military tradition would never be quite the same. The Battle of Legnica was not an isolated event. On the same day, April 9, 1241, a second Mongol force under Khadan and Orda was destroying the Hungarian army at the Battle of Mohi, 300 miles to the south. The Mongols had executed a two-front invasion of the European heartland with such coordination that the two battles occurred within hours of each other. Despite the forces being separated by nearly 3 mountain ranges, this was not cavalry tactics. This was operational level strategic planning on a scale that Europe would not match for another 3 centuries. The Mongol commanders were not chieftains riding on instinct. They were trained operational planners who had conquered territory from the Pacific to the Adriatic using a military system that drew on 50 years of continuous refinement under Genghis Khan and his successors. Europe encountered the most sophisticated army on earth in 1241 and had no idea what it was looking at. The Mongols did not sack Roscoe. They did not continue into France or England. Within months of Legnica, the great Khan, Ogedei, died in Karakorum, triggering a succession crisis that pulled the Western troops back to the east. Europe was given a reprieve it did not earn, but the shadow that Legnica cast stretched for centuries. The Italian city-states began experimenting with lighter cavalry. The condottiere, capable of controlled retreat and flanking maneuvers that heavy northern knights couldn't manage. The Hungarians hired step-style light cavalry units from humans who had fled the Mongol advance. Military theorists across the continent began, slowly and reluctantly, to ask why the most powerful army in Europe had been destroyed in under 2 hours by men on small horses with smaller weapons. The answer they eventually arrived at: flexibility outperforms mass. Doctrine must evolve faster than armor. Would take 200 years to fully reshape Western continental defense. Legnica was not just a battle. It was a lesson written in blood on a Silesian plain, addressed to every general who would ever be tempted to believe that because something had always worked, it always would. Consider what the feigned retreat demanded of the Mongol rider while galloping away from an enemy, away from men who are screaming and trying to kill you. You are expected to maintain precise unit cohesion at exactly the right speed, fast enough to stay ahead of the heaviest destroyers, slow enough to keep them coming. You are expected to fire accurately backward over your horse's rump. The partisan's shot with a 160-pound draw weight bow while bouncing on a galloping horse without reins in your hands. You are expected to maintain your assigned position in a precise funnel formation that you cannot see from inside, trusting that every other rider is doing exactly the same thing. And you are expected to do all of this while your own psychology is being trained to feel no shame in retreat, to rewrite the most primal warrior instinct in any culture, in any century, the instinct to turn and fight. The Mongols did not just train bodies, they trained the mind itself. And that was the deepest advantage they carried into Legnica. The European destroyer was, in its way, a masterpiece of medieval engineering, purpose-bred over generations, trained from Overhood to carry 350 pounds of men and armor at a controlled gallop while responding to leg signals alone. It was an incomparable weapon for the one thing it was designed to do: deliver a heavy cavalry charge into a massed infantry formation. The Mongol steppe pony was built for an entirely different problem. It could travel 80 miles in a day on grass alone. No grain needed. It could operate in temperatures from -40 to +40. It could be ridden, traded for a fresh horse, and recovered because each Mongol rider kept a string of 5 to 7 horses. At Legnica, the Mongols weren't tired. The Europeans were exhausted. The Mongols were not running out of horses. The Europeans had won. Logistics, in the end, is just another word for time. And the Mongols had bought more of it. We have spent this film dissecting a single hour on a single field in a single April morning 780 years ago. Why? Because Legnica is not really a story about the past. It is a story about the moment any system, military, organizational, conceptual, encountered an adversary that doesn't know it's supposed to fight by the same rules. The knights at Legnica were not inferior warriors. They were, in their context, the finest soldiers their civilization had produced, but they carried assumptions so deep they couldn't see them as assumptions. They thought the way they fought was the way fighting worked. The Mongols knew that every doctrine is provisional, every advantage is temporary, every enemy has a pattern, and every pattern has a gap. They were not smarter, they were more adaptable. In the end, adaptability is the only permanent advantage there is. The Battle of Legnica is over in every archive, every chronicle, every history. But the question it poses has never closed. What happens when the system you built, the values you trained, the doctrine you inherited, the armor you forged, meets a world that does not recognize its rules? The knights at Legnica were not wrong to be courageous. They were wrong to believe that courage alone was a doctrine. Baidar was not a genius who invented new tactics. He was a student who took what worked and built a system around it. A system that could survive contact with an enemy it had never seen before. That's the deepest lesson of April 9th, 1241. Not that heavy cavalry failed, but that any system, no matter how powerful, carries within it the assumption of its own permanence, and that assumption across every century, every continent, every battlefield is always the first thing to break.